Chapter 3. Toulouse, 8th of March, present day. Cursing myself for forgetting to stash sunglasses alongside my burner phone. To be remedied at a later date. I stumble out of the main doors of Perpin Hospital, wincing into harsh, streaming sunlight, my eyes still struggling to get their act together regarding basic focusing muscle movements. The warmth feels good. I've thrown together illusory clothes so as not to dish out heart attacks to the poor patients and doctors, but they're not doing anything to actually stop the chilblains rising on my skin. A tram glides to a stop opposite, discharging a mixture of hospital employees, glum visitors, and the occasional walking wounded lucky enough not to need an ambulance, but not lucky enough to have a ride to A&E. The bustling hubbub ends, the handoff of passengers in and out of the metallic carapace complete. After a momentary blare of a siren, the hushing slide of doors brings a comparative quiet back to my world. With the smooth disappearance of the tram, I see Aisha across the tracks, waiting against a sporty-looking Alpine A110. She certainly wasn't driving that the last time I saw her. I don't know how much time has passed since then, though. Time flies when you're having fun. Or when being artlessly carved up by insecure and mentally deranged mages. Potato, potato. Aisha regards me with the patient expression of a trained killer who knows the exact worth of every second currently wasted. The slight frown shows the chances of her demonstrating said skills on me for free are increasing equally rapidly. Tight, black curls frame her sharp cheekbones and haughty features. Her eyes are two dark teardrops, burned back into the shadow of the aquiline curve of her nose. A Ciala tattoo divides her chin, its tree branch growths like sprouting arrowheads, the interspersed seed dots, marking her passage into womanhood. Although she isn't tall, her presence carries the weight of character and experience, making people instinctively move aside to let her pass, excluding the terminally stupid. I never cease to be amazed at the ability of some people to ignore the silent alarm bells that her aura must set ringing in the primal part of their brain just so they can make some sleazy or sexist comment. Comments that usually precede them needing to visit the same premises I just vacated to have their foot surgically removed from their mouth, if they're lucky. She gives me a terse half nod, flicking her head back, telling me to get in the car. Explanations can clearly wait. Clambering into the back seat, I am beyond relieved to find a change of clothes. Jeans and a plain grey t-shirt, some dusk blue Timberland nubuck boots, and a grey and black Averex jacket. Once dressed, I scramble forwards through the middle aisle. Aisha, opening the door, pushes me towards the passenger seat, the instruction brooking no discussion. I detest your driving when you're fully settled in a body, Sabi. Her constant, coiled spring readiness is present in her voice and her posture. The idea of allowing you to run amok in a new ride with a new ride, she snorts, is not my idea of advisable for either of our health. Good to see you too, Laguna, I reply, and happy to be chauffeured about. Wouldn't dream of objecting. Honestly, I'm just happy to be in one piece again. The last few days... I stop. How long have I been gone? 3 days, she answers. 3 days thinking, surely he's not such a dickhead he's died again already. 3 days waiting to swing by here or Rangoy after realising that yes, you are precisely such a dickhead. Here's an idea. Try not dying for a bit. She clicks her tongue at me. It is as effective a castigation as any finger-wagging lecture ever could be. She has a point too. I don't take good enough care of my borrowed forms. At least it's distracted her from her usual reaction. Suddenly, her face goes slack. Her arm rises slowly level, her finger pointing at me. Ah! Apparently it hasn't sufficiently distracted her. I half slap her hand away, groaning, "Yes, thank you, Donald Sutherland. That still feels as fresh as ever, multitudinous bodies later. I shall revoke your Netflix privileges if it continues." I wag my finger at her. "The power of shared passwords compels you." She responds with a dismissive wrist wave. Then, her features lock down again, and she returns to her high-strung, uber-vigilant state, sliding out into the flow of cars. "Where to then, Paul?" she asks. Her visual scanning rate is a marvel. The sort of thing government spooks would kill to master. She is constantly aware, analysing all the pedestrians and vehicles in our vicinity, every glint and reflected image. Hundreds of years of survival as an independent woman in societies that would rather you simper in silence and get intimate with violence has honed her to a weapon-like readiness. Only the Nazis ever got the drop on her. She's never filled me in on exactly what happened, but I'm guessing they used incredibly clever trickery combined with overwhelming force. Either way, being caught unprepared is not something she intends to allow to happen again in the next millennia. Leaning forward, I switch on Radio Booster, one of the local stations. I know some people think radio is outdated, but hey, so am I. I can live with that. The live back and forth of young rappers thumps over boom bap beats and I relax, enjoying the mix of wit and braggadocio. I think if you asked most people how they'd imagine someone who was over 800 years old, a sage greybeard would spring to mind, every eye crinkle, a trove of hidden knowledge. Alternatively, they might picture a grumbling curmudgeon, his fist waving at a world he no longer understands. Personally speaking, well, there are times I feel every day of those 800 years weighing me down. I've never lost my passion for innovation and originality. I don't look back on the past with rose-tinted fondness. If you think modern music is lewd, you should have heard the troubadours when they did their rounds of the Pyrenees. Prudishness over coarse language and sexual imagery is a modern invention. Me? I'm glad to see open expression becoming the norm once more. Change is the one constant. Rolling with it keeps life interesting. I look to each arriving generation to reinvigorate my soul with their new outlooks and approaches. "Over towards the Wren," I reply, the whoosh click of the seatbelt syncing momentarily with the drumbeat. I settle back in the seat, forcing my new usage-sore muscles to relax. There is no point in them complaining. I'm not about to break the habit of 100 lifetimes just because they are a bunch of softies. We've got a mystery to solve. Jinkies. Thanks, Daphne. That's Velma, you fucking idiot. Thanks, Velma. No worries. You're still a fucking idiot, though. We ease our way off the roundabout onto the rocade, the ring road that loops round the periphery of the city like a 3-year-old's first crude attempt at a circle. I fill her in as we drive. The short 10-minute trip is long enough for me to update her on my misadventures in tracking down the mighty Wizard Tim wannabe. You didn't even get his name? The sharp eyebrows arching once more speaks volumes about her opinion of my poor detective work. I didn't really get any opportunity to ask questions outside of and what the fuck before he started carving pretty patterns into me, I respond, frustration creeping into my tone. Again, the most powerful Enochian runes I have ever encountered, from a cretin with such little talent that calling him a mage at all is like calling a duck an Aquarian hellbeast. I was entirely blindsided. I'm assuming you have a better plan this time than walk in blindly and get tortured to death? Aisha is a perpetual planner. She insists it's a positive character trait. I think it screams PTSD. My preference to avoid getting stabbed in the face means I keep that to myself. Of course, I lie, then immediately start navigating her through the packed patchwork urban sprawl, heading towards Pat d'Oie before she can call me out on it. Brutalist grey cubes dominate the skyline, brightened only by flag-line streamers of washing drying in the sun. Resilient, concrete weeds sprout amongst a bouquet of individual buildings that look thrown together from different eras and areas. A mountain-air fresh blue and red chalet on one side looks plucked out of the backdrop to the sound of music. On the other is a bright, white, minimalist 70s dream of two up, two down. Together, they squeeze like over-enthusiastic bodyguards, the two-story shack between them. The shit wizard's abode. Reds and oranges paint the corrugated roof. Water stains run down the imperfect steel. Cracks emanate from each angular point of every piece of framework, and the wooden shades of window panes are an unhealthily swollen umber underneath the few remaining paint chips of sun-bleached green. The garden is littered with metal ephemera. Parts of rusted machine skeletons lie half swallowed by the rampant weeds and grass, nature winning out in the long run. She normally does. Broken glass shards refract anemic rainbows from the sun's lazy descent behind the hulking neighbouring tower block. I point the house out, and we position ourselves across from it, snagging an on-street parking spot with views of both the building itself and the corners of each intersection. The road lies strung between two larger residential streets. I make enough illusory changes to my face to make me unrecognisable to the schmuck, but Aisha doesn't bother. He didn't know who or what I was. The chances of him being aware of who my friends are remain minimal. I swivel my gaze back and forth. Aisha is much more naturally aware than I am. She's not seen the guy, and his talent isn't strong enough to make him obvious at a distance. I keep myself on high alert. It turns out to be unnecessary. Within a few minutes of taking up position, the door cracks open. Out comes our shit wizard, nose first, like a rodent, scenting for danger before locking up. He ducks his head, which is wrapped in a filthy old tan raincoat, and engages in a brief tug-of-war with the half-unhinged wire gate at the edge of his property. I am not sure he is going to win, in all honesty, but eventually he stumbles out onto the pavement, then dips left and heads towards the corner store. We follow, discreetly, pacing him, casually closing while never giving him cause for alarm. He's skittish, though, his hands trembling violently. It looks like my suicide and the following magically disintegrating corpse trick is causing him more distress than the act of heinously torturing me. He turns onto a narrow footpath between two towers and finally glances backwards. We are already within arm's reach. On its own, our closeness undetected would have been unnerving enough. But it's not until I raise a don't look here barrier at each end of the alleyway that the first inkling of his predicament trickles into his expression. Aisha catches him around the Adam's apple with one hand and pins him against the crumbling concrete of a wall. He squawks like a tonsillitis-ridden parrot. I release my illusion, and his eyes, already saucer-like, grow to the size of dinner plates. When Aisha pulls her hand back to leave him suspended against the wall, the reality of the situation is self-evident in his terrified expression as he gasps and chokes for air. I suppose I should pity him. He's a nothing. A pathetic failure from an uncaring society who discovered another secret, wondrous, magical society underneath, and then promptly failed at that too. He is a reject of rejects, and if I was in a better mood, I might feel some sympathy for his predicament. But spending 3 days being carved up like a turkey after the person serving guzzled half a bottle of sherry has strangely reduced my capacity for sympathy. So, funny thing, I start, walking over to him casually. I don't know your name or what you're doing in my city, but what I do know is that, I tap him on the forehead in time with each word, you are a shit wizard. Say it with me now. He coughs and splutters as a red flush spreads up his cheeks. Aisha eases back on the Darth Vader grip and he sucks at the air like a kid in an ice cream soda parlour with a block straw. I give him a few more taps on the forehead as a reminder. I'm a shit wizard, he says, showing a capacity for learning I wasn't sure he had. You are. But credit where credit's due, you kept me captive, which shouldn't have been possible, so let's have a chat about that. Sure he's not capable? Doesn't look like it, but looks can be deceiving. It's a valid point from Aisha. I've run into people who didn't seem capable of hurting a fly, but actually took great pleasure in plucking limbs off ogres for fun, like petals off a daisy. She loves me not. True, but in this case, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, you should probably lay off the Class A hallucinogens. Again? True. Point is, well, let me show you. I wave my hands, and an image of the half-cocked attempts at runes of persuasion he carved into me pop up, rotating holographically in the air. Aisha looks at them, then does a double take like a 90s cartoon character. She slowly swivels her gaze from them, to him, to me, to the runes again. Her cheek muscles start twitching, almost in spasm, and a corner of her lip does a minute upcurl. Are those meant to be runes of persuasion? I've seen kobolds with palsy that can draw better than that. As for thinking they would work on him... The shit wizard looks terrified. I guess her expression is closer to a grimace than anything else. Also, she's holding him dangling a metre off the floor by the neck with her talent, which I can understand isn't casting her in the most positive light. But to me, she looks like she's cracking up in hysterics, ripples of amusement spreading out across her expression. Micro changes no one else will notice in her locked down features. I grin. It's a genuine pleasure, honour and privilege to see her loosen that rigid composure even a tiny bit. Few people get to know the woman underneath that hardened shell of self-control. I wave a hand in his direction. Plus, look at him. Even if he had the knowledge to draw them properly, do you think he's got the power to make these work? Aisha fixes him with a gaze, her eyes unfocusing slightly. I know she's looking at him in the magical spectrum, assessing how strong and talented he really is. She looks again at the hovering hack job runes, then pivots towards the sheet-white maid she has pinned against the wall, her features locking down, shaking her head. The small smile, precision placed upon her features, holds no humour, no joy, and little of that treasured humanity she fights so hard to keep. This is her, in her Erinier's aspect, the embodiment of furious justice. Not at all. Now me, I can make these work just perfectly. She uses her finger to pull the translucent image across, overlaying it like a hectograph across the terrified creature. I could use these as a working guide. Tattoos are so last season. Scarification is all the rage. Tell us who you work for. He blubbers, weeping huge, heaving, gasping sobs. I can't. I would, but I can't. She pulls a knife from the air, its edge luminescent with arcane forces. Oh, I beg to differ, she purrs, dark lightning stirring in her irises. His collapse is instantaneous. This is not a man blessed by nature with an abundance of courage, or talent, or charm, or indeed very much at all. I kind of feel sorry for him, like I want to offer him a shoulder to cry on. Then, I remember him driving a razor-sharp knife into said shoulder, and so instead, sit back and let the good lady break the bastard. I'll talk! I'll talk! Snot fumes out of his nostrils like nasal bubblegum. Incidentally, why has no one invented nasal bubblegum? Wonka missed a trick there. I mentally add sending an anonymous suggestion to the top confectionery manufacturers onto my to-do list. He opens his mouth to spill his lily-livered guts and then stops, a single, swift choke interrupting him. His tongue swells from the usual speckled white and pink to a mouth-filling mass, spoiling to sable in colour. It wiggles in a manner so unnatural it's clearly come loose from its moorings and is now operating as an independent agent. It undulates and pulses, then slithers rearwards, disappearing from sight. His features constrict with horror as his throat engorges, a slug-like shape visible through the stretched skin crawling down his esophagus. Don't you want to do a Nostromo two-step backwards? Aisha asks me. I look at her, blank-faced. Forehead creasing, she stabs her eyebrows at me as if unable to understand my innate idiocy, then, with a sigh, pops her eyes wide as she puts her right hand to her chest bone. With a rhythmic back and forth, she mimes said hand bursting from her sternum, snapping out towards me with a mouth made of her fingers and thumb. I am a little disappointed she doesn't mime the second set of teeth somehow, but it finally clicks. Oh, got you. I hastily shuffle backwards, pulling my sword from the ether in case we go full chest-burster, and step into an inside stance, my blade point aimed at his upper torso. The shit-wizard's eyes roll backwards as he shakes seizure-like, the flickering of his eyelids like one of those 18th century zeotropic handspun animations, the red capillaries straining on the visible white parts of his eyes. As we prepare ourselves for the possibility of doing battle with a hoodoo equivalent of a xenomorph from Alien, his ending becomes less dramatic, if no less disturbing. Around his midsection, the spasmic movement speeds up, becoming a vibration. His stomach roils, rippling about like a lake peppered by hailstones in a sudden storm. The motion becomes increasingly wave-like, spreading up his torso and down his thighs. As we ready ourselves, the centre of the agitated mass blends together, and the stains on the raincoat slide downwards as if sluiced off by a high-powered hose. It isn't simply the stains slewing away. The raincoat itself goes too, and so does the shit wizard himself. Flesh liquefies, and a rapidly expanding hole forms in his guts, the chalk-grey concrete visible through it, growing from the size of a euro to a fist. I can make out a faded graffiti tag by Spasm, still left as a piece of history on the wall behind him. The trickle becomes a torrent, and the wannabe Oscar Diggs disintegrates, liquefying before our eyes. Well, that was anticlimactic and yet still mildly vomit-inducing, I say, peering into the puddle of brown, red, and white slush, quickly evaporating into nothingness. An effective hex to have used on an ineffective shit stain? Aisha clicks her tongue as she frog bends her knees to peer at the last traces of the nameless, talentless, luckless wizard. Did you recognise the spell at all? I stretch my shoulders back, letting the tension dissipate, standing down from my readied state. Now, there are various schools of magic that could pull off similar curses, but it looked like the Eastern Yaga school sort of work, although I've seen something not dissimilar worked by a pissed-off Kylek in the Wicklow Mountains as well. When so many of us magic users are long-lived, intermingling of magics is a natural byproduct, useful when we want to learn, less so when pinpointing origins. We trudge back to the squat, ramshackle house, a drunken celebrant held upright by the accommodating arms of his long-suffering neighbours. The garden itself is unwarded, and the front door carries protection so fragile and poorly constructed that I went through them the first time I busted into his house without even needing to break them. This time, I slowed down and looked past the first layer of the workings cast by our Arnold Tote impersonator. I look underneath the flaking emulsion, beneath the poorly shaped sigils, further and deeper in. As I concentrate, I can make out the sensation, then the visual shape of the Enochian runes that bound me, holding me powerless as soon as I entered. I'm reasonably skilled at deciphering and deactivating Enochian markings. I studied under the best, even if crafting them isn't the main part of my skill set. But these are leagues beyond my capacity. That's why they so effectively unmade my talent after my grand entrance, sapping both my magical and physical strength, and leaving me at the mercy of the bargain basement spellslinger I stumbled across. These aren't just beyond the shit wizard, though. They're beyond me, beyond almost every talented I've ever come across. There's only one person I can think of who might have done this level of Kabbalist working, Isaac, and that's because he created Kabbalah. Well, there is one other. Problem is, he's been missing for over 200 years. I'm pretty sure he's dead, however much Isaac's never given up hope. Have you ever had a mentor? Someone who's there to help and guide you, to tolerate those moments of plain stupidity or rash foolishness, to help you become a better person? Could be a friend or a family member or a teacher, doesn't matter. Point is, someone who changes your life, changes you. Someone who stays with you, guiding your steps forward. A constant you can turn to when all else seems like shifting sands. Then, one day, something happened. A loss, a death, a pain that mentor figure can't fully conceal because it is breaking something in them, lessens them. For you, they never cease to be the giant they've always been, but you see behind the illusion to the human hurting under the facade. Perhaps they become quieter, less active, or withdraw, disconnecting little by little from the world around them. That's what Isaac did when he lost his brother Jacob, when his searching turned up nothing. I look over at Aisha. Could you do this? Simple question. Not that I believe she did it, but because I know she'll be brutally honest. Brutality and honesty, two things you can rely on Aisha for. She looks, cocks her head, considering, then shakes it. No. Could undo it, or smash it to pieces, from the outside at least, but make it. She shakes her head again. As I thought, Aisha's a master of force, but this sort of finessed working isn't her forte. I try a different tack. Who could work this? Her eyes narrow, concentration evident. The sister and a Bordeaux combined, perhaps? Still not likely. Can't think of any off the top of my head. Needs to be a top-tier talented and Kabbalist. She's right, as usual. It's not just the terrifying level of power you'd need. I couldn't have come up with these sigils, and I studied under the man who invented the whole discipline. A man I love like a father. A man who's been consumed by the search for his lost brother. A brother who is the only other talented I can think of who could do these workings. If he isn't dead, after all. After all, he was there at the start of Kabbalah with Isaac. He carries an angel inside him too. Problem is, if he isn't dead, then where's he been? He can't have been held captive. The talent it'd take to constrain a Bene Elohim, the angel merged with him, should be beyond anyone from this plane of existence. Problem with saying can't in our world, though, is only 3 things ever limit you: a lack of knowledge, a lack of talent, or a lack of imagination. Maybe the last one is my stumbling block. Perfect example. Knowing the deadly silent killer opposite me as I do, radiating power and potential violence, I can't imagine anyone ever getting the best of her, coming up with a way to hold her captive, even though I know they did. After all, I rescued.